First of all, I'd like to thank you for attending this talk. And I really hope that 2020 hasn't been too disruptive to your lives, your careers, or your businesses. I'm sat here alone at our studio in Paintworks. It's empty now. It's usually full of hustle and bustle and creativity, but there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel. So it'll be really interesting to see what we can all learn from the experiences of this year and how we can improve maybe our work-life balance in 2021. Now, it's never really easy to know where to pitch these talks. The audience is usually a mix of skills, experience, and interests. So I'm taking quite a top-line view of creativity in the path to purchase for tech companies, but there will be some time at the end for any specific questions you have. If you have any questions, as Ben said, please add them to the chat, and I'll either answer them as I go along or answer them at the end. So, my name is Nick Farrar, and I'm the director of Workbrands. We're a creative agency based here in Bristol. That's all I'm going to say about Workbrands, all I'm going to say about our agency, as I know it's dull as dishwater to hear about other companies. But I will give you a little background about me. Now, so I've got a bad throat at the moment. I've been working in the creative sector in Bristol for around about 25 years now. And that's a career that spanned pre-internet, where if you wanted information on something you wanted to buy, you had to ring somebody up or send a letter or a coupon to receive a brochure, read a probably biased review in a magazine, or perish the thought, walk into a shop and look at the real thing and ask a real person a question. Then came the dot-com boom and the massive shifts that the internet brought to marketing and continues to do so. Early adopters of the internet did incredibly well. Personally, I didn't fare so well. My agency at the time was very much geared towards traditional print advertising and earned far too much of its revenue from agency commission from publishers. In hindsight, it was a bad business model, but I was young and it demonstrated the real importance of truly understanding the trends that can affect your market and your business. And now we have the incredible and constant advances in AI and marketing automation, which continue to shape how the tech sector is developing new business and nurturing existing business. But more about that later on. Throughout the 25 years, there's been a constant theme which to me has grown stronger as our technology develops, and that is that there is an undeniable and unbreakable link between the level of creativity you apply to a business situation and the quality of the outcome. I'm hoping that this talk will go some way to demonstrate this. Now, I'm going to start this talk with a quote, and I think it's my favorite business quote ever. And it's, "Good design is good business." And here's a bit of background info to put this quote into context. The guy who said this was somebody called Thomas J. Watson. He was a senior executive at IBM. And in the early 50s, he was taking a lunchtime stroll down the Fifth Avenue in New York. He stopped at an Olivetti shop where their ultra-modern typewriters were set out on a pavement, or a sidewalk as he called it, for passers-by to try out. The machines had sleek designs in a variety of bold colours and in modern plastics. Inside, the shop was bright and modern looking and reflected the look of the typewriters. Mr. Watson returned to his dull, dimly lit IBM offices and looked at the drab and boxy computers that they produced, and he had a think. Shortly afterwards, he met with Elliot Noyes, who was a well-respected architect and museum curator, and he commissioned him to look at IBM from a purely creative perspective. Now, in the 1950s, there were no brand agencies, so Noyes put together some of the greatest creative talents of the day. Together, they embarked on a mission to redesign every aspect of IBM. Logos, packaging, factory, offices, advertising, and materials were all considered. It was probably the first time an entire business, its management, operations, and culture as well as its products and marketing, was conceived as an intentionally created product or a kind of work of art. In an interview, Noy said, "In a sense, a corporation should be like a good painting. Everything visible should contribute to the correct total statement. Nothing visible should detract." Now, from a corporate perspective, IBM became the company to beat, the paradigm of a modern corporation. It's a design philosophy that's now seen as essential for tech companies from large to small to express their brands, their values, their point of difference, and to stand out in a highly competitive world. Okay, so I understand that creativity is completely subjective, and it's very easy for me to sit here and say it's good for business based on a nice story from the 1950s. But increasingly, there is more and more research and findings being undertaken on the effectiveness of quality design in marketing. Now, McKinsey recently published an analysis of how 300 companies performed over a 5-year period. And it showed that, on average, design-focused firms deliver 32% higher revenue growth and 56% higher shareholder return. Now, if you're in a marketing department and you're after some additional budget, these are the figures to take to your CFO. Or if you're in startup or scale-up mode and you're thinking about your brand or your website, have these figures at the fore of your mind. With that in mind, what I'd like to talk to you about today are my thoughts and approach to the importance of creativity in technology, specifically in technology marketing, and with a real focus on the path to purchase. We'll be looking at why creativity plays such an important part in your marketing mix, what types of marketing assets suit each stage of the buyer journey, and then I'll give you an overview on how to plan, execute, and measure creativity in your own marketing. Now, I'm sure you're all acutely aware that the internet and advances in online technology has changed tech buying habits dramatically. Long gone are the days when sales teams could manage the sales process from start to finish. These days, potential customers are spending less and less time dealing directly with you and more time on internet research and discussing potential purchases with their peers. In fact, according to IDG, as much as 80% of time in a typical tech purchasing process is spent before a prospect actively engages with you. So what does this mean? Well, quite simply, it means that each of your touch points throughout your business development cycle has to be as good as it possibly can. Each of your touch points needs to stand out, each needs to compare favorably with your competitors, and each needs to leave your potential customer wanting to find out more and move further down your sales pipeline. Now, here are some very simple facts about the sheer volume of content available online that you're competing with. Over 2 billion pieces of content are shared every day on the main social media platforms. 70% of tech marketers, and remember these are your direct competitors, are creating more content this year than last year and are planning to increase volumes over the next 12 months. With all this content to compete against, the average attention span of your audience is a measly 6.5 seconds. So the question isn't, how do you create content for your sales pipeline? That's easy. But the question is, how do you create great content and how do you make it stand out from the crowd? How can you take your audience on a visual voyage? Now, visual content isn't new. You could argue that it's been around since humans first drew on cave walls, but let's look at it today in the context of tech marketing. In a nutshell, visual content uses the visual human system to communicate information in ways that are easy to consume, understand, and recall at a later stage. It's by no means an alternative to written content, which will always be vital to good communications, but it greatly enhances a user's ability to absorb information and retain information. Why does it work? Well, it turns out that our brains aren't wired for reading words at all. In human evolution, writing is relatively new, and in the short time since its invention, we haven't evolved a dedicated mechanism for reading it. We're still geared up for recognizing visuals. Now, here are some pretty compelling figures from the theory of visual communication by a guy called Paul Lester. We remember 80% of what we see, 20% of what we read, and only 10% of what we hear. In fact, 90% of what our brain absorbs is visual. So much so that visuals are processed 60,000 times faster than the written word. So when you've only got 6.5 seconds to spare to grab somebody's attention, it's visuals that get the message across better. I'm just going to show you a very quick example of exactly what I mean. Here's a very simple demonstration of how an image is quicker to understand than written text. So let's take this warning sign here. It takes a few seconds to read. It's completely unmemorable. It has no personality or tone. If I change the slide, you wouldn't remember it at all. But take the same message and change it to an image, and it's instantly understood, remembered, and portrays the right tone. Visuals can also bring a written piece of content to life. As I've already mentioned, the written word is vital. It builds trust and credibility with your products or services. It educates your audience and allows you to portray yourselves as the thought leaders in your arena. It's all well and good having a fantastic case study or white paper, but if it doesn't get read, it's no use to anyone. Long copy needs to look great to appeal to an audience. Here are a couple of stats that demonstrate the importance of presenting your articles and long copy well online. 75% of consumers judge a site by its design, and they make that judgment within the first half second. But only 6% of those consumers judge a site by its content. So it's obvious that you need to look at how your content looks in order to get people to read it. Now, the next few slides are going to illustrate how you can add visual content campaigns to your marketing strategy. I think this slide sums it up quite nicely. The path to purchase is longer and more complex than ever, but let's try and break things down a little bit. Now, there's a good chance that your business development is based on a traditional sales funnel. It's a great tool to track leads to prospects and then prospects to eventual customers, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. In reality, your buyer's journey and your customer journey are intrinsically linked. So this is a more realistic model. It demonstrates the whole journey from being completely unaware of a product or a service to buying it for the first time and then eventually to becoming loyal advocates for that solution. Tech buyers typically interact with an average of 5 to 6 pieces of content in their path to purchase. Now, there are 6 stages to this model, and each one of these has types of marketing which resonate really well at each stage. And we're going to concentrate on the buyer's journey, which is the left-hand side of this model. Your buyer's journey starts with building awareness, through to consideration, and then eventually onto conversion to buying products and services. At each stage, the content caters to the appetite of the prospects. So the first stage is building awareness of what you do. Your awareness content should appeal to the broadest section of your target audience. For many people, this is going to be the first time they have come across your product or service, so you want to make the right impression. The content here needs to be informative and entertaining. It should capture attention and provide something of value to the viewer. It should leave them with the feeling that they can relate to your solution and want to find out more. If the main aim of your visual content piece is to raise awareness for a new product or service or to a new audience, Some great formats to use are infographics, infobites, videos, social, spotlights, slideshows. I just want to have a quick word about infographics because they're a really effective way of driving awareness. Data is often a key component in tech sales where numbers can have a real impact. And infographics have been proven to be an effective way to get data across in a way that engages with people early in the sales process. Now, there's always a temptation with infographics to find as much information as you can and to shoehorn it in. Now, that's great if you have enough relevant and exceptional data to hand, but all too often that dilutes the impact of what you're really trying to get across. Too much information can't be remembered, and too much information can't be easily shared and passed on. If you have a killer stat that really demonstrates the impact of your technology, for example, the amount of time or energy or money it can save, then you should really consider just using that. Here's an infographic that demonstrates a key rule about effective communication. More often than not, less is more. Now, this infographic, it's not tech, but it's a great infographic, only has 2 facts that combined tells a compelling and memorable story. Sharks don't kill many people. In fact, they kill about 1 a month, but we kill a lot of sharks every hour. We kill an awful lot of sharks. You get the full impact of this infographic by looking at the sheer volume of sharks that we kill. And it's no wonder, obviously, that a lot of our wildlife is endangered. But this is a really compelling infographic that just has 2 stats. The next stage on your path to purchase is consideration. Building rapport with your potential customer to establish trust and to start to build credibility within your brand. Now, this is the stage where your target is typically carrying out their own research, either through their peers or through the internet. It's an ideal time to start to introduce your product or service information. It's really important here to remember that people want to know what's in it for them. They're not interested in great long spiels about your company or necessarily how your product works, but how your product or service will affect them. The benefits, how it will make their life simpler, better, happier, easier. Now, we've already seen how visuals can get a message across quickly. So really think about the first few seconds that a person looks at your materials. Is it going to leave them wanting to find out more or looking elsewhere? Now, ideal formats for this stage include white papers, ebooks, explainer animations, briefs, articles, and case studies. And I just want to talk a tiny bit about case studies. A recent Gartner report showed that 78% of tech buyers believe that strong customer references were the second most influential aspects in their purchasing decision. If you're interested, the first was the quality of direct interactions with the vendor. But when thinking about case studies, it's worth remembering that color and moving visuals increase people's desire to read content by 80% and share content by over 70%. Video case studies or animated elements in your case studies will really help bring them to life. They'll stay in people's minds and they're far more likely to share them with peers if they look interesting. So conversion is the last part of the buying cycle. This is often where that first most influential aspect of tech purchasing comes to the fore, that being the quality of a potential customer's interactions with you. Depending on what you're selling, what your solution is, this interaction might be anything from a generic online sign-up form with activation to a complex sales process to a multiple number of people in an organization. And I really think it's a part of a process that can become a stumbling block in the sales cycle. So you've planned and you've done everything you possibly can to nurture people down your pipeline with some quality content distributed to the right platforms. It's gaining traction. But this is a stage where all too often a rogue salesperson has the chance to really go to town on a presentation or a proposal, adding their own content and designs as they see fit. According to the same Gartner report, 58% of tech buyers would consider eliminating a potential vendor if there is a poor interaction with them. So that sales deck or presentation that your rogue sales guys left behind can be a ticking time bomb when it's compared to your competition. A little word now about presentations. It's absolutely imperative that your presentations and your proposals are as considered as the rest of your marketing materials. Presentations never sell products. They're there to support the person presenting. Now, SlideRocket, who are an online presentation platform, undertook some kind of tongue-in-cheek research at an event, and they had research about PowerPoint presentations, and they found that a whopping majority of the delegates would rather visit a dental hygienist than sit through a bad PowerPoint presentation. And there are a couple of key things here. You have to keep the content brief. Steve Jobs was one of the best presenters ever. Whether he was presenting the Apple brand or a specific product launch, he nailed it every time. Steve Jobs never had more than 5 words on a slide at any time. He thought they detracted from what he was saying. So again, less is more with your PowerPoint slides. He also practiced, and he practiced a lot. It's reckoned he practiced for at least an hour for every minute he presented. Bearing in mind, a lot of his talks were over 60 minutes long. That's a lot of practice and something we should probably all consider and make time for when we're preparing presentations to potential customers. Now, the customer journey, this is the right-hand side of this loop. Depending on your business model, your customer journey will differ, but ideally you're looking for your customers to enjoy your products, expand their spend with you, renew subscriptions, create a bond with your organization, and ultimately become an advocate for you. Now that's known as the loyalty loop, and it's definitely what you're striving for in your post-sales. A loyal customer is great. A customer that shouts about your product or service from the rooftop and becomes an advocate is even better. Peer-to-peer recommendation, as we know, is such an essential part of the buying process. So the way you communicate with your customers is essential to encourage this. Now, when you look at this model, the customer journey, it gives the impression that your company or your marketing department needs to be a content machine, continually churning out oodles of stuff for each stage of the customer journey. But it isn't really the case. And a good planning of a piece of content can make it go a long way. This here is an example of some content we've done for ourselves. The campaign was the Great Awareness Heist, and it was looking at stealing attention from your competition. Our main goal with this content was to get into large B2B companies to give presentations. It was a piece of content that lasted us well over a year and was spliced and diced for each stage of the sales cycle. Memes and infographics to drive awareness, online presentation, an online white paper to help consideration. An edited version was shared on SlideShare, which is a great platform, by the way, and on our own site. The activity culminated in a number of presentations and opened the door to one of our biggest clients to date. So good planning of your content will give it legs and it will last a long time and serve you very well. There's a good tip here when you're putting together any piece of content. We kind of grandly call it pretext, but use your content as an opportunity to get in touch with some key prospects. For example, if you want to write a white paper or host a round table, contact half a dozen prospects and ask if they'd be interested in taking part. That way, you're not waiting for the content to be completed before you can get in touch with them and put it in front of them. You get to talk with these key people before you create the content, whilst you're creating it, and then when it's completed. You're also massaging their ego and let them know that you genuinely value their opinion. So that's a whistle-stop tour of a typical textile cycle and what formats work best at each stage. I thought it would be a good thing now to cover off some of the stages to start creating better visual content. Now, these are the kind of typical stages that you'd have when you're making a plan. So you'd want to look at what you want to achieve, what your goals are, define your audience, create a story, a compelling story, looking at the best formats that fits the part of the sales cycle that you want to put this content, ensure that you have effective design, and then look at how you're going to distribute and promote your message. For this talk, we're just going to look at the top three, which is kind of the creation of the content. And we'll touch a little bit on distribution right at the end. But the first thing you have to do is to put down what your objectives are, what you want to achieve, and more importantly, how you're going to measure the success. So for this, ideally, your objectives need to be quantitative, something that you can prove that you've hit. For example, generate 20 qualified leads a month, or increase your newsletter subscription by 10%, or get 50 people to subscribe to an event. Be realistic with these targets. Don't be too ambitious. You don't want to set yourself up for failure. It's far better to smash a target than fall short. Once you've set your objectives, you need to start planning how you're going to achieve them. The first logical stage for visual content is to create a great story. And the first question here is, who's going to be interested in it? Now, you need to work out your buyer persona profiles. Excuse me. These profiles are absolutely key for successful tech marketing. Think about who you're selling to. Their job titles and description. What are their goals? Are there particular common goals that resonate with what you're trying to sell? What are their challenges and pain points when trying to achieve these goals? And really importantly, what's their role in the purchasing process? Is it technical? Is it financial? Or are they focused on the bigger picture? Also, spend time to understand where their watering holes are. Where do they go to consume information about products like yours? Now, this is an incredibly important exercise to carry out and only really takes 15 to 20 minutes for each profile if you have a well-structured brainstorm session. Bear in mind, there are often multiple people in the tech buying process, so you may need to repeat the process a number of times. Now, if you haven't written personas before, here's a great and free online resource to help you, makemypersona.com, with some really, really useful tools. So, you know who your buyers are, you know your objectives. Now we need to define a message. Now, your message is typically where your core expertise crosses over with some of the core issues or challenges that your personas have. Examples for these and these times would be that if you're a tech company dealing with virtualization, a challenge your audience has may be working from home while the schools are also closed for the pandemic. So your message could be about keeping kids entertained safely online. Or you could be a point of sale fintech company. Many of your customers are struggling with the pandemic, so your message could be about reaching and converting more customers online. Again, this is a relatively easy but useful exercise. Play around with your different personas, challenges to create different messages until you found one that really resonates with what you're wanting to achieve. You now have your objectives, you have your personas, you have your core message, but you need to get your audience to sit up and take notice. You do this by creating a compelling story and presenting it with great visuals. Now, there are many ways to achieve this. If you have the budget, You could brief an agency from the outset and let them come back to you with ideas, but you may not have the budget, or you may want to retain more control of your project, or you may just want to be a part of the creative process. And a good way to do this is to have some kind of ideation sessions, some brainstorming sessions with your team to try and uncover some great ideas. Now, I kind of set some rules whenever we have a brainstorm session with clients or internally, and they're here. The first rule is that there are no bad ideas, okay? And this is the same with any brainstorm session. It's often the quietest, shyest person who has the best ideas, so you have to make them feel confident to speak. If people have an idea rejected at the start of a session or laughed at, the chances are they'll clam up for the rest of the brainstorm. Rule 2, make sure people are prepared, relaxed, and in a creative mood. Make sure you send a brief to all the people in the session a couple of days beforehand and give them a clear idea and an agenda about what you're after, and ideally some examples of what you'd like to achieve. Rule 3, use visual material within the brainstorm session to stimulate the thought process. It's far easier to take inspiration or learn from what other people have done than to stare at a blank piece of paper. Write everything down and stick your ideas on the walls. Post-it notes are great for this. They're not particularly cutting edge, but they can be easily moved around and are ideal for prioritizing or grouping ideas as you go along. Once you've had your session and you think you've got some good ideas, have a break and come back later or the next day to see, review, and refine. Too often in marketing, we take the easy option and go with the flow. This is often because we get cold feet about trying something bold or different from the competition, but often these are the ideas that would gain the most traction if we went ahead with them. They're the ones that get the most traction, get shared the most, or have that undisputed title of going viral. Now, here are a couple that really went a couple of examples that really went the extra mile when it came to thinking outside the norm. Now, if you go onto YouTube, there are hundreds of train safety videos online. Public health videos with children playing football near railway lines, etc., etc. But these people definitely took a fresh approach. I'm hoping you've all seen Dumb Ways to Die. It's a few years old now, but it's still going strong. Over 195 million views on YouTube strong. It's been made into games, websites, and heaps of merchandise. The second one I want to show you is from the usually ultra-safe Volvo. I think it was a brave person who put their hand up in this session and suggested that having Jean-Claude Van Damme doing the splits over a couple of moving trucks would be a great piece of visual content for Volvo. Both of these ideas demonstrate that the best ideas are often the unexpected ones, and you often have to step outside your comfort zone if you really want to get noticed against your competition or stand out in the crowd. Okay, so there were a few pointers in creating some content. The final stage is to get it in front of your audience. If you wrote a blog and nobody came to read it, did you really write a blog? This is a quote from Outbrain, one of our clients, and I think it's a pretty good segue into talking very briefly about AI in tech marketing. I'm assuming most of you are in the tech sector, you're all techies, so I know you'll probably know that artificial intelligence in marketing is the process of utilizing data models, mathematics, and algorithms to generate insights that can be used by marketeers. It can be an amazing asset. It helps personalize interactions through collecting information and behaviors. It improves marketing efficiency and eliminates mundane, time-consuming tasks. It reduces costs on time and staffing, for example, using chatbots over customer representatives. It also reduces mistakes from human error born through the boredom of performing repetitive tasks. if you're fortunate enough to have accurate data, AI will help you get in front of the right person at the right time. But AI can't be creative. It can't make the emotional connections that will make people resonate with your product or services and want to buy from you. It can't get the right message to the right people at the right time. And that's the key to a successful visual voyage for your potential customers. So my final slide in this talk is another quote, and it's this: if you think good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. Okay, guys, thank you very much for your time. That's my talk over. I don't know if